Okay. Hey. Okay. Um, we got a couple of minutes. So um, I want to. I've talked to a couple of people after I've last been on here um, about kind of the epiphany that I had and shared with y'all live about the cattle prodding of people and how it's really a great analogy to what we're looking at because of the manufacturer of both of the cattle prods are the exact same entity, and it can be used on both the left and the right to kind of herd people along. And it's such the perfect analogy when you think of the production of the cattle prod being the international syndicate. So that kind of was just a huge light bulb for myself, um, because it kind of sneaks in the two chapters we're going to cover tonight. It kind of sneaks into the theme. Um, this author, and of course the people at the time, can't blame it all on the author, but um, I question the author in not exploring some of the other um, corollary. They will make like a brief mention of a particular company or something like that, not realizing the overall implications. And I think that's just a huge missed opportunity as to delving into the real people behind the curtain, if you will. So um, let me make a comment that we're on over on True Social. Let's see. What I don't know what's going on my True Social. Let's see. Okay. All right. Let's get back to it. All right. So we're on chapter 7. Julie has emailed me. I think I'll post it at the end. The footnotes of the book, because we don't want people distracted looking at the footnotes, but it will give you a launching pad after we're done to do some additional research on your own. So I'm actually, um, if this ever goes anywhere, Julie's going to be my PR person. She's like done a fabulous job. Her two kids are helping doing footnotes. So if you'll look on my True Social page, you'll see a lot of um, posting of the reference material at the end of each chapter. So if you guys want to do some further exploring, where I find most of my books, honestly, I have found a few key ones like the hidden histories from you guys. However, I find like the Gladio one I found as a footnote in Hidden History. He had quoted, not Hidden History, I'm sorry, The Third Way. He had quoted something out of this book. And so I very much, and I think it's hilarious that Julie went right to that, looking at the references and the footnotes because you can find a lot of very interesting stuff, especially other books if you're interested in the topic. So with that, let's dig in. All right, so chapter 7 is called the false flag terrorism. And as a general overview, it just gives you a couple of examples, actually several, primarily focused around the state of Italy, the nation of Italy, and shows you the extent to which this operation, and literally this happened in every country. We have our own examples. But again, the author was very fixated on Italy because of the use of the Vatican Bank and how Sicily and the mafia tied into the whole thing, which is appropriate for the point that they're trying to make. So I just want to let you know that even though we focus on Italy, it is by no means isolated to Italy, as we're going to see tonight. So the strategy of tension increased impetus after US President Richard Nixon took office in 1969. Henry Kissinger was Nixon's national security advisor. He issued orders to Gelli, who is the guy that's running this network in Italy, through his deputy, General Alexander Haig, for the implementation of terror attacks and coup attempts. Kissinger was deeply concerned about supposedly the monumental communist party gains that was occurring. But the author later on acknowledges at some point they called everything a communist. If you were anti US business, you were a communist. If you were anti American, you were a communist. So they're just using that label. So don't fixate on the word communist because they've plastered that label on everybody. In addition to the millions being channeled to P2, and P2, as a reminder from last time, is the Masonic Lodge that was created in Italy and extensively inside the Catholic Church, even though that was against all of the Catholic Church rules. You're not allowed to be a Mason, but almost everybody in the hierarchy of the church was a Mason. So they they channeled millions of dollars through CIA officials into the Sedona, which he's the guy that's their money guy, for implementation of the strategy of tension. In 1970 alone, Sedona received more than $10 million from the US ambassador. And at the time, that was Ambassador Graham Martin. Now, Graham Martin, based on what we've already learned in our, I'm just going to read this to you, and then I want y'all to tell me what sticks out at you. Graham Martin was the US ambassador to Thailand, to Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. Then he was the ambassador to Italy, and he was the last ambassador to Vietnam. He was involved in the implementation of FDR's NRA, which was basically, as we learned in the Anthony Sutton books, that was socialism light in the United States, the National Recovery Act. And it was eventually deemed unconstitutional. And his mentor was Harriman, the banker. He was in Army Intel in the Pacific. He first met Nixon while he was the ambassador to Vietnam. And then when he was he met Nixon when he was on a tour. Nixon was on a tour as a private citizen to Thailand, and Nixon is the one that made him the ambassador to Vietnam because Graham Martin was a Democrat, and to Nixon's way of thinking is if Vietnam fell, they'd blame it on the ambassador, and he was a little whacked out while he was there. But anyway, what sticks out at you guys when I'm telling you that he was the ambassador to Thailand, he was the ambassador to Vietnam, and the ambassador to Italy, based on our previous session? Anybody? What you got? Come on. Come on, Julie Beans. I know you got something. All right, I'm going to let that one sit for a minute. I'm going to come back to it because this is a quiz. arresting anarchists. The acts of terrorism were attributed to the left-wing radicals, and 80 suspects were rounded up. So the first major attack that they had was December 12th, 1969, when a bomb exploded in front of a bank. Mostly lower farmers were killed. There were 17 people killed and 88 injured. And within an hour, 3 other bombs exploded all over Rome. And this, so they immediately come out and say it's left-wing radicals. They arrest 80, including a guy by the name of Giuseppe Pinelli, an anarchist railroad worker. Pinelli dies while he's being questioned in police custody. Supposedly he fell out a window. Maybe that's where they get all these bankers falling out of windows. Maybe it's something that they practice as part of the Operation Gladio. So another one of the anarchists that was arrested as a part of the bombing, because he was identified by a taxi driver who supposedly said that he took them there. He was held for 3 years in preventative detention before he was sentenced for the crime. 16 years later, the guy was exonerated because they found who actually did the bombs. Sounds like January 6th practice, too. So Italian police investigators were not totally corrupt, and they were not totally incompetent. They kind of wish-washed between the two. So they discover, after months past the bombing, an organization called Ordine Nuovo, ON, called New Order. So we're going to refer to it as the New Order, a neo-fascist organization founded by a guy whose last name is Rowdy. He came under suspicion, and on March 1972, a guy by the name of Giovanni Ventura, Franco Frida, and Rowdy were arrested and charged with planning the terrorist attack. The evidence against them was compelling. The composition of the bombs used in the bombing were identical to explosives that Ventura hid in a friend's home a few days before the incident. The bags in which the bombs were concealed was purchased a couple of days before the attack in Frida's hometown. Despite all of these findings, the 3 men were let off with no prosecution. During the trial, alarming claims were made. Ventura told a court that he was an agent of the CIA. He also directed court officials to safety deposit box that he had in the name of his mother and aunt. Within the box were confidential CIA files. One document dated May 4th, 1969, listed a number of detailed steps to be taken, including a possible wave of terror attacks to convince public opinion of the dangers of being left-wing, which is basically anti-West. When asked if he had been manipulated by the CIA, Frida said, "The life of everyone is manipulated by those with more power." Isn't that the truth? So 30 years after the bombing, during the trial of 3 other New Order people, General Maletti, former head of the Italian counterintelligence, said that the massacre had been carried out by Italian stay-behind army wing terrorists on the orders of the CIA. In his sworn testimony, Maletti told the court the CIA, quote, "The CIA, following the directives of its government, wanted to create an Italian nationalism capable of holding what is saw as a slight to the left, and for this purpose, it may be used as right-wing terrorism." He also added, "Don't forget that Nixon was in charge and Nixon was a strange man." So obviously, I have a little problem with in these stated testimonies that we're going to hear a whole bunch of. Everything is focused at the CIA. Everything is focused. You don't hear any mention of MI5, MI6. You don't hear anything mentioned of Galen in the German intel apparatus who set the whole thing up originally. So I'm not definitely taken up for the CIA trust. I do believe this is very one-sided, and it's as if everybody that gets caught that was part of this all focuses on the CIA to the exclusiveness of to the exclusion of everything else. So, just keep that in mind too. Um, Also, we go on and he's talking about the Italian military intelligence sending a senior officer from Rome to Milan to prevent the bombing, but instead, a different officer from a different location, in order to put the blame on left-wing anarchists. So, the all of these things are done in order to kind of point in the other direction. And it's not unlike here where they claim racism, but then at the same time, they have to create the racism that they're claiming that they're trying to prevent. It's history repeating itself. They perfected this technology and this brainwashing as part of Operation Gladio, and I hope that comes across to everybody. So, in the course of the 30-year investigation, Italian officials were able to put into place the key planners of the bombing. Hung Fendrick, a leading engineer, oversaw the proliferation of attacks and coup preparations. Selena, oh, he was a lead engineer for a company called Selena. Selena, with offices in Rome, specialized in electronic security and defense. The company was owned by Finmecca Nicca, a conglomerate with a long history of ties to the CIA. Fendwick was his job was to study and refine plans, draw up an analysis of the political situation, and left all the dirty work to the New Order and the neo fascists in order to. So he was basically like a planning cell. The bombing was alleged to have been commanded by Navy Captain David Carrott, a Carrett, a CIA operative attached to the NATO command in Verona. Carrott worked in tandem with Gladio commander Menento and Diglio, a CIA mole with the New Order. And then another attack. On December 7th, 1970, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, a Gladio unit launched what was referred to as the Borghese coup, an attempt to topple the Italian government. It was named after Junio Valerio Borghese, and he was nicknamed the Black Prince. The coup attempt, it was named after him, sorry, the Black Prince. The coup attempt involved several hundred gladiators, including Gelli and Sidona, along with members of the Italian State Force Police. The planners intended to kidnap the Italian president and to murder Angelo Beccari, the head of the National Police Department. In a last minute, the plan was canceled. When news arrived that the Christian Democrat government knew of the plan and stood ready to declare martial law. Borghese had been busy during the Cold War. He continued to recruit former members of several left-wing activists for Gladio, and the organization's design was to subvert the institutions of the state by means of a coup. He set up his military headquarters for the coup in Rome in a shipyard owned by one of the country's leading industrialists. According to the newspaper accounts, Jesus James, I think it's James, anyway, Angleton of the CIA arrived at the shipyard before the coup attempt and left immediately after it was canceled. So there's two things in there you have to pick up on. So the first thing is that leading industrialists are part of something really weird just happened. Leading industrialists were part of this network. Um, and also, the CIA is part of the network. Um, so I want to go back just a second to my question about what you're supposed to recognize with regard to Graham Martin. So you remember we talked about in the first couple of sessions of the extensive drug network that was set up between um, the Burma planes with the Flying Tigers and General Chennault and Laos and Cambodia and China, and how all of those drugs were flown to French labs and then labs in Sicily, and then they went to Cuba. Well, what's interesting is when it came down, when the operations got pushed out of China, thanks to Mao trying to kick all the drug people out, and Burma exploded in the production of opium, their contact was Thailand right about the time this guy was there. So you have this guy in Thailand, and then what happened during the after the French left, who, by the way, Vietnam had been supplying them with the opium for the French mafia labs, which is how we got our start of using those French labs. Um, guy gets appointed to be the ambassador of Vietnam at exactly the time that the operation shifted to Vietnam. So that guy's dirty. So just wanted to add that. Okay. When Borghese died in Spain in 1974, it was said that the Black Prince had been poisoned because investigations into the 1970 coup had begun in Italy and too many people wanted him dead. That's what happens when you know too much. 30 years after Borghese's um, French investigative Zot uncovered evidence that the military attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Rome was intricately involved in the plot. Manzat also discovered that President Nixon had carefully monitored preparations and remained constantly informed of the developments by the CIA officials. These findings were confirmed in a FOIA in December 2004. Next attack. May 31st, 1971. Car bomb explodes. It leaves 4 carabinieri injured, 1 wounded, 3 killed. The carabinieri, as we talked about earlier, were summoned to the site. There was an anonymous phone call, and it had to do with an abandoned Fiat 500. They opened the trunk, the bomb went off, and 2 days later, there was an anonymous call that said, "Hey, it's the Communist Red Brigade." So, of course, 200 communists are rounded up and held in custody when it had nothing to do with communists at all. The case against the brigade during this time was eventually weakened by a discovery near a Tereste by the Carabinieri in February 24th, 1972. The Italian officer stumbled upon an underground arms dump containing automatic rifles, grenades, composition C4, the most powerful plastic explosive in the world. The officers initially thought the cache might have belonged to the criminal group of the brigades, but the C4 is what stumped them. The Mafian brigade relied on explosives made out of a completely different material. C4 was an explosive that was exclusive to NATO and US forces. Keep in mind NATO, not just US forces. A week later, more arms were found in a nearby cave. The second discovery prompted General Saravelli, the commander of the Gladio and Italian military intelligence, to order the dismantling of all arms dumps in the forest, meadows, church basements, and cemeteries throughout Italy. The dumps contained portable arms, ammunition, hand grenades, knives, daggers, mortars, recoilless rifles, sniper rifles, radio transmitters, binoculars, and various other tools. The weapons were removed from 137 burial sites and transported via a secret plane to the Gladio base in Sardinia, because that's where they keep all of their prisoners, and that's where they conducted all their training, as we learned. So the aircraft exploded in the middle of the air because it was rumored that Cervelli was supposed to be a passenger on the plane. He obviously knew too much too. In 1990, Cervelli told the press that he had been shocked to discover the extremist views of those in his command. I don't think he was actually all that shocked. Um, because you would not have been because he was the commander of Gladio. So that was just a bold-faced lie. In 1984, after 12 years of intense investigation, the leader of the New Order was taken into custody and questioned about the one of the bombing incidents. After confessing in court that he had planted the bomb, he goes on to say that there exists a real life structure, occult and hidden, with the capacity of giving a strategic direction to the outrages. There is a secret force parallel to the armed forces, a secret organization, a super organization with a network of communication, arms, explosive, and trained men to use them. That they took up the task on NATO's behalf in to prevent a slip to the left in the political balance of the country. Following his conviction and sentence to life in prison, this guy, in an interview with The Guardian, is quoted as saying, "The terrorist line was followed by the camouflaged people belonging to a security apparatus, or those linked to the state apparatus through rapport or collaboration. I say that every single outrage that followed from 1969 fitted into a single organized matrix." And he's right, um, as part of that new order. So he talks about it being the institutions of power within the state itself and part of the Atlantic Alliance. So that's devastating. So now it's going to get very hard, and that was in 1984. So it's going to get very hard for them to keep ignoring it. But we're going to go through a couple more so that you get the effect, because these were happening. It's called the Age of Lead, because there were so many people. There's another blast that was in a garbage container in the middle of a plaza that I won't go through all the details. It's the same scenario. They carry out the attack. Tens, if not hundreds of people die. They blame it on the Red Brigade. There's a terrorist attack on a train in 1974 as it pulled out of a tunnel. 12 people killed, 105 injured. So then under the label Master Plan, in 1976, Gelly and other P2 officials, which is the Mason Lodge, drafted documents outlining their plans for democratic rebirth, excuse me, of Italy. The plans call for the infiltration and control of all state institutions, all opposition groups, all trade unions, the leading newspapers, and the national TV stations. Does that sound like what's going on? Can y'all still hear me? Hold on a second. Can you still hear me? Oh, okay. All right. We're going to go on. My frame is frozen, so I'm going to keep going. Okay. So basically, what I just told you is the quote unquote Gladio plan is to do what we've all discovered has been done here. They're going to infiltrate every union, every media, every newspaper, every state institution, and all of the opposition groups. So this is exactly what we call controlled opposition. Okay? This is replicated in every country these people ended up in. So, and this is actually a written plan, which came to light in a hilarious way. The drafters of the plan believe this takeover could be accomplished by the expenditures of 40 billion lira, or approximately $250 million in black funds. The overall objective was the establishment of a club where the best level of industry, financial sector leaders, members of the liberal professions, public officials, magistrates, as well as selected politicians were represented. Sounds like the club. The club would implement a series of electoral, judicial, and constitutional reforms in order to make the people more governable. National political life would be subordinated to an oligarchy, that's not easy to say, represented by the lodge. So they are literally telling us the plan right here. And it was found in writing. So Gelly and his Masonic brothers could pull any string anywhere and things just fell into place. And supposedly it was under the guise of the American controllers. But the controllers are not just American. The plans, as outlined in these P2 documents, were found by the Italian police at the Rome airport when they were concealed in the false bottom of the suitcase belonging to Gelly's daughter. Also in the suitcase was a top secret US military dossier entitled Stability Operations, Intelligence, Special Fields. That was to be published under the authority of General William Westmoreland, US Army Chief of Staff, supposedly to fight against communists, as always. So the next incident jumps up to 1978. Aldo Moro was Italy's prime minister. He was kidnapped on his way to Parliament for the opening of a debate of a newly formed government of national unity because he did the unforgivable. He wanted to form a coalition government of communists, socialists, and Christian Democrats so that everybody in Italy was represented. That's not allowed. The incident, that's what we're supposed to think democracy is, which is why that's not allowed. This incident occurred when a white Fiat with diplomatic plates pulled in front of his black limousine, forcing the driver to slam on the brakes. Two men from the Fiat and four other assassins who had been waiting on a sidewalk nearby, all of which were in Alitalia pilot uniforms, opened fire on Moro's bodyguards, killing all five of them. Moro's policy of working and bringing everybody together was denounced by both the Soviets and the US. Of course it was. That's just hilarious on its face. But no one had been more outraged at the Italian Prime Minister's attempt than US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. When Moro had paid a visit to the United States, Kissinger warned him, you must, quote, you must abandon your policy of bringing all political forces in your country into direct collaboration, or you will pay dearly for it. Gosh, that sounds vaguely familiar, like something our current politicians just said. The prime minister, after the meeting, became physically ill and contemplated retirement. And here's a newsflash, he should have. The military secret service and acting prime minister Andreotti immediately blamed the left-wing terrorist organization, the Red Brigades, for the kidnapping and proceeded to crack down on the left. So Moro is kidnapped. They do an all-out manhunt trying to find him. And they turn to Pope Paul VI for help. A guy by the name of Steve Pachenzik, a former U.S. State Department hostage negotiator and international crisis manager, I'm going to say he's probably a crisis actor, claimed that he played a critical role in Moro's fate. He had been sent to Italy on the day of the kidnapping by Brzezinski, Mika's dad. President Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, who viewed Moro's project of accommodation with the communists with great disdain. In Rome, the Nick, whatever, his name's weird. Let's just call him Steve. He worked, I'll spell it for you guys, Pieczeenic. We're going to call him Steve. Worked with a crisis committee headed by Francisco Cossiga, Italy's interior minister. Cossiga, who became Italy's prime minister in 1979. Oh, like the next year. And president in 1985, had strong ties to Gilly and Gladio, Operation Gladio. So here you've got the guys held hostage, and you fly in this other guy, Steve. You also have Admiral Torresi, head of the General Staff of the Defense, and a whole bunch of other people. One of which, get this, his name is Walter Pelosi. Can you believe that? Walter Pelosi is a Mason. Walter Pelosi was also involved in PLO activities. So Walter Pelosi is head of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So all these people are in a group going, oh, and they're also all in the P2 lodge. So it's as if this guy's screwed because the very people who's trying to get him out are the guys responsible for his kidnapping. So you've got all of this later investigated. They remain in constant contact, not only with the committee, but with Gelly. So May 9th, 1978, the committee forged a memo attributed to the Red Brigade stating that Moro was dead. So now you have Gladio writing a memo pretending that the Red Brigade actually kidnapped this guy when they're holding him. And then they released this memo saying he's dead. And what they say afterwards, Steve said the memo, which was leaked to the press, served a dual purpose: to prepare the Italian public for the worst and to let the Red Brigade know that the state would not negotiate for Moro and considered him already dead, because the Red Brigades don't have him. So it actually shows that the Red Brigade yet again was going to get set up for it. So when Moro's letters was made in the 4th week of the kidnapping, when Moro's letters became desperate and it sounded like he was about ready to reveal state secrets, they launched this plan that basically said he's dead. So that's just mind-boggling. So they actively, and this is just one of many, as a part of Operation Gladio, took out the leader of Italy. And this Steve guy is quoted as saying, "We had to sacrifice Aldo Moro to maintain the stability of Italy." That's just crazy. Okay, so an investigative journalist, and maybe this is why we don't have too many of them anymore, Carmine Mino Pecorelli, drew a connection between the death of Moro and Gladio. Moro's body, he noted, had been left in the trunk of a car parked next to an ancient Rome amphitheater where runaway slaves and prisoners fought to the death in gladiator combat. Who knows? He's quoted, "Who knows what there was in the destiny of Moro that his death should be discovered next to that wall? The blood of yesterday and the blood of today, all wrapped around Gladio, or gladiators." So Moro's kidnapping had been carried out and was by lucid superpower, in quotations, and had been inspired by the logic of Yalta. He described the crime as one of the biggest political operations carried out in the recent decades in an industrialized country integrated into Western system. And the reporter goes on to say, "We will talk about Steve, whatever his name is, who participated for 3 weeks in the Interior Ministry's expert meetings, then returned to America before Moro was killed and reported to Congress that the measures taken on the Moro affair were the best possible in the circumstances. Yeah, because they can't afford to have him talk. This reporter was then gunned down near his office in Rome, murdered. The barrel of a gun had been shoved down his throat and the trigger pulled twice. It's a classic gesture of mafia practice, stone in the mouth, or lead, I guess. Police officers discovered a stone within his mouth as an announcement that the journalist never again would divulge a secret. So I guess he divulged the secret that the hit had to do with Operation Gladio. Hyperion Language School. The fact that the Red Brigades had been infiltrated by the CIA and Italian Secret Service remains no longer contested. The strategy of tension was to encourage violence from the radical left in order to convince the Italian people they needed to repress the rise of communism. So I also made a note that if you have to invent the problem to fix it, there isn't a problem. Just saying. Thanks to the infiltration, which occurred in 1973, the brigades began to work closely with the Hyperion Language School in Paris. With most brigadiers, I assume they're calling them as part of the brigade, unaware that that the school, this Hyperion Language School, had been founded by the CIA. They opened an office in Italy short before the kidnapping and closed it right after the kidnapping. An Italian police report singles out Hyperion as the most important CIA office in Europe, founded by the Corrado Simeoni, a CIA operative who worked with Radio Free Europe and informants in the Masons and in military intelligence, and Moratti, the CIA operative who was later convicted of killing Moro. The school acted as an intermediate for meetings between Italian and foreign terrorist groups, including the PLO, which is where that Pelosi guy fits in. The Red faction of Germany was involved in this as well. In 1974, 4 years before the kidnapping, Red Brigade founder Renato Curcio and Alberto, I'm sorry, I'm butchering these Italian names. You would think if I lived there for 3 years, I could do better. And a guy by the name of Alberto had been arrested in Rome. They immediately accused Moretti of turning them in, who was part of the CIA. But in fact, he was a CIA spy embedded in the Red Brigade. So he tells the parliamentary commission that the people who were supposed to have carried out the Moro operation will be perfectly aware that they were not capable of it. So, in other words, the Red Brigade did not do it. His testimony is supported by several facts. The gunmen were mowed down Moro's bodyguards were highly trained assassins with skills that the Red Brigade did not possess. The assassins were obliged to wear Alitalia uniforms in order for them to recognize each other, which, again, if it was a Red Brigade and it was all done by people who meet often, they would know who each other are. Moro had been held captive in an apartment complex owned by Italy's military agency. The bullets that riddled Moro's body were treated with a special preserving paint that characterized the ammunition found in the Gladio arms dumps. By 1981, Moretti was arrested apparently by accident and eventually confessed to the kidnapping. He received 6 life sentences for murder, but never cooperated with investigators. Casaga, when he became president of Italy in 1985, pressed for a pardon. Moretti was paroled after 15 years and presently resides in Milan. his early pardon by the court was never explained. So there's another country that has no justice. 6 life sentences, he spends 15 years living large in Milan. This is decades. So don't get frustrated now that it's going slow. These poor people's known about it the entire time. So Friar Felix Morlian, a Belgian priest, was affiliated with the Hyperion Language School and served to establish its branch of the school in Rome. During World War II, he had worked closely with Wild Bill Donovan of the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, by creating the Pro Deo, a Catholic intelligence agency. What the heck does a Catholic Church need an intelligence agency for? When the Nazis seized control of Western Europe, Donovan, well, we know because they used it. Donovan relocated, that was a rhetorical question. Donovan relocated Morleon and his agency from Lisbon to New York. In 1945, the priest relocated to Rome, where he became the private emissary of Pope Pius XII and 4 of the successor popes. Throughout the 1960s, he remained a pivotal U.S. intel agent, as witnessed by his key role in the Cuban Missile Crisis. At JFK's urging, the Dominican priest had attended a strategy meeting in Andover, Massachusetts, where he established a communication channel between Moscow and Washington, mediated by Pope John XIII, through whom messages were passed that brought an end to the threat of nuclear war. In 1966, Morleon established, with funding from the CIA, the Pro Deo University, which became Libera University International. As president of this new university, Morleon became a force in formation of right-wing policies for the Italian government. He also reportedly began recruiting terrorists and assassins, including Moretti and a couple other guys, who eventually attempted the hit on John Paul II. This just gets like bizarre. Questions about Morleon's involvement in Moro's matter rose from the discovery of photos taken by another guy of the prominent priest in the company of the leading Italian military intelligence officials at the time of the kidnapping. Ah. So the guy that's in charge of the Catholic intel apparatus is in pictures with the Italian military intelligence guys at the time that the prime minister is kidnapped and murdered. Nothing to see here. When the Rome office of the Hyperion School, which Morleon helped to establish, opened shortly before the Moro kidnapping, only to close the following autumn. Even more puzzling was that the Prodeo founder received prominent mention in the secret files of Gelli, which were seized by the Italian police in 1982. So now you have Friar Antonio Menini, who's a Vatican official, served as an intermediate person between Moro and his family during his kidnapping. Now, what's interesting is the guy they picked to be the intermediary between the kidnapped guy in charge of Italy and his family. That guy is a friar, part of the Catholic Church. His dad ran the Catholic Church bank, the Vatican Bank. And we know that they are up to their eyeballs as P2 members and money laundering for drug people and the mafia. So this is the guy that's running back and forth, carrying quote unquote messages to the family. Holy crap. Menini came to serve in this capacity. How he came to serve in this capacity raises lots of questions about the Vatican's involvement in the crime. You think? So they have claimed, they also claim that he heard Moro's last confession. And his dad as chief of the bank, actually worked for that Mark Markinkus guy that was totally corrupt that we learned about last time. Why would the Red Brigade, supposedly the avowed atheist, employ the services of a priest to hear the last rites of a guy they're about to murder? They wouldn't. And why would that guy be the guy that runs the Vatican Bank? It wouldn't be. They'd have just grabbed a guy off the street. So it gives you um, almost the sense that the entire Catholic Church was part of this. I'm not saying it was, but there's a lot of people involved. Manini, following Mauro's death, rose through the ranks of the Holy Mother Church and presently serves as the papal nuncio to Great Britain. I guess that's the chief guy. And the Vatican to this day continues to shield Mauro's confessor from ever having to testify in state hearings concerning the prime minister's abduction and death. So, in other words, Catholic Church, when people wanted to question this guy, like what did he say, what was his demeanor, he was not allowed. He was forbidden by the Catholic Church to talk to anybody about anything involving it. But I did look him up, and he currently now works in Rome directly for Pope Francis. He also had been stationed as a chief of the Catholic Church in Russia and Uzbekistan. So he has a very interesting background. So next we get to the 1980 bombings in Bologna. There was an unattended suitcase in a central train station, 84 people killed, 200 wounded. Worst terrorist attack on Italian soil since World War II. And again, it was made out of an explosive that was not readily available to anybody except for Western military. So this particular bomb was very similar. It was the same material that the Italian police had found in some of the arms dumps that they had found from the Gladio operations. So now the heat really started. So they start in August of that year. The prosecutor starts issuing arrest warrants, not of the classic communist, but actually as some of the fascist groups that were part of Operation Gladio for the first time. They became the go-to people because of the bombing material. So after they arrested 26 people, they were immediately told to release them. Gelli and his fellow gladiators were now forced to lead investigators in the wrong direction by bringing forward believable suspects in a web of deception that allegedly woven by Michael Leedon, a U.S. operative who had worked closely with the Masons in Italy and part of the Center of Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, which is a think tank that had been established by the CIA. In 1981, Henry Kissinger maintained an office at CSIS, along with Brzezinski, who served as the National Security Advisor to Carter from 77 to 81. A carefully constructed new report, which was leaked to the Italian press by these guys, placed the blame for the bombing on a group of international terrorists known as the European National Fascists, whose leader was Karl Hoffman. Hoffman's group, the phony report alleged, had been trained to attack in Lebanon by who? Oh, the PLO. They're grabbing at anybody, placing blame at everybody, and it's them. This is so replicated today. That's why everything is fake news, even the stuff that comes out of the government. This report seemed credible. 8 weeks after the Bologna bombing, a group of Hoffman people had blown himself up at the Oktoberfest in Munich. At least they said they were of that group. This explanation might have held despite the fact that it was denied by the PLO and could not be verified, despite them having made several trips to Lebanon. So, too many mistakes had been made and too many nagging questions, like the type of bombing materials, the testimony of all of the suspects that had been rounded up over the years and referred to as quote unquote years of lead with all of the bullets and bombs and blah, blah, blah. So in 81, finally, they get around to raiding Gelli's villa. It uncovers a list of 962 Masonic members that include the top Italian intelligence, military, media, and political officials, along with several prominent Argentinians. And see, this is where I think this guy breaks it, kind of loses track. The tie to Argentina ties right back to the German network. You see that? Because that was where all of the Nazis funneled. So you have these planning cells, they're all tied together and they all go back to Germany, not the US and UK. Not that they're not involved, because they are. But if you're going to look for origins, there's your origins. And I'm not going to read all these names because there's a bunch. He doesn't list all 962, but gosh dang it, wouldn't you like to have one of them lists of our own government of people involved in this crap? I would love it. So you have basically a guy that becomes a prime minister in Italy, even after this is discovered. You have Sedona, which we already know about. You have leading Italian newspaper owners. You have Italian Army Intel. You have Minister of the Interior, intelligence guy, Army Intel, Chief of Staff of their armies, the Central Intelligence Service, commander of one of their guards, another commander of one of their guard units, a journalist, leading television talk show, Democratic Socialist Party secretary, the good guy that kept blaming the bad guys over there on the communist side. A member of the military junta in Argentina, and then a whole bunch of Argentinian people, to include their Navy commander. And so the bottom line is in this chapter is they now, as a result of that, Gelly daughter's documents, and we know that they got the classified information from the CIA, and now we've got the documents that has all of the list of the people involved throughout the Italian government, that government within a government that one guy had talked about. We're going to tie it into Argentina. And also, this ties to the current Pope Francis, as we're going to see, because at the time, he was stationed in Argentina. So from 1965, we're going to go to chapter 8. From 1965 to 1981, there list throughout Europe a whole bunch. I'm not going to go into details in all of them, but country after country has Gladio units that are doing just what we went into. I wanted to go into in depth in Italy because it was so extensively covered in this book. I'm not going to do it in the other countries, but I do want to make mention of the countries so that you understand during this exact same time, it wasn't just happening in Italy, it's happening all over. So you have in 1965 in Portugal, there was a company set up, and under the leadership of that company, there's Operation Gladio type events like they experienced in Italy. In 1966 in France, Charles de Gaulle denounced the secret warfare of the Pentagon and expelled NATO. Now, I didn't even realize this. I mean, I knew it, but it kind of just like hit me. Charles de Gaulle, who they tried to kill several times, these Operation Gladio units, He got so mad that he expelled NATO out of France because NATO was not originally in Belgium. It was in France. And he got so pissed off, he told NATO, "Get your Gladio units and get the hell out of my country." So that's in 1966. In 1967, Greece had issues. Um, in 1970, Spain had issues. And keep in mind, Spain was very fascist at the time, but even they had Gladio units. In 1977, another issue in Spain. In 1980, Turkey. Um, oh, and what I thought was hilarious about this one is the commander of the Stay Behind Army Counter Guerrilla, General Efren, and what they referred to as gray wolves. And what did I tell you about the original name of Operation Gladio? They were called werewolves. So this directly ties it all together. Um, okay, so that was 1980. In 1981, you have one of the uh, explosions in Germany. So it's all over. In Latin America, they had their own Operation Gladio, and we're told that this one was also called Operation Condor for the Latin America version of Gladio. The word communist by this time was applied, this is the point I was trying to make, so liberally and so loosely to revolutionary or radical regimes by US intelligence that any government risked being labeled that if they advocated nationalization of private industry, especially away from foreign owned corporations, radical land reform, different trade policies that disfavored the West, ex- acceptance of any Soviet aid at all, or what they viewed as anti American foreign policy. Because if you did anything against private industry that the international syndicate owned, they're going to deem you as a communist and they're going to kill you. That's the whole purpose of Operation Gladio. And this is the part, this is like a 10 sentence paragraph. This is the part I think needs to be fleshed out even more. The corporate entanglement of these Operation Gladio units doing the bidding of these international industrialists that we will see a pattern repeat itself in this book, that it's bigger than 10 lines because they're the ones that benefit from it. All of that stuff to carry out those operations were bought by them, bought from them because they own all the defense contractors. They own all of the bullets, all of the rifles, blah, blah, blah. So they own the intelligence apparatuses. And so you have all of this coming to play, and they are the ones that end up. So if you've got a country that goes in like Venezuela did and nationalizes the gas company to keep the resources inside of Venezuela, and you kick the nasty foreigners out who's raping all of your profits and not benefiting. And I'm not saying I'm a pro Venezuela person, but I'm just saying it makes you rethink everything. How much have we been lied to? Because anybody anywhere that goes against the international syndicate ends up in the crossfires of Operation Gladio. Okay. The game plan of Operation Condor was developed in part in the 1950s at a Brazilian advanced war college that's similar to our US National War College. So they too, like the guy that they caught in Italy with the plan, also have a Latin America plan. Is that the same as how the left screams racism? Yes, it's exactly the same. So, very astute comment, by the way. You're going to see this thing played out over and over and over again because this is, the whole propaganda part of it. The implementation of the plan for nation building, this plan adopted from the Pentagon and the U.S. Army experience of reconstructing post-war Japan. stemmed from Karl Haushofer's call for the science of geopolitics. So, the premise of a permanent world war between the forces of communism and the West. What did I tell you? Perpetual warfare. So, there's a Brazilian, without going through all of the details here, there's a Brazilian coup. Okay. Um, and interestingly enough, these names just keep repeating themselves too. Students at the Advanced War College, including a guy by the last name of Branco and another guy whose last name is Silva, which is very important because the current guy is Silva, right? Um, I don't know whether they're related, but I think that's awful interesting. Um, because that Silva guy is part of this whole thing. A Lieutenant Colonel Vernon Walters, the CIA chief coup engineer, who knew we had one, in 1964, the graduates of this college united into a junta that overthrew the democratically elected left wing government of Goulart. Following the coup, Branco emerged as the new Brazilian president and Silva as the head of the Brazilian's first national intelligence service. So you have the guys that plan Operation Gladio, depose another leader, and the people that do the deposing as part of Operation Gladio end up as the president and chief of intel. Imagine that. So they managed the coup with the influx of $20 million from the CIA. And where did they get their money? From selling drugs to blacks in Los Angeles. And that's about ready to ramp up. And New York primarily, but Miami and New Orleans as well were ports. All done through pre-communist Cuba. So they in turn accepted the entire package of U.S. demands, including a generous new profit remittance law and an investment guarantee treaty covering U.S. subsidiaries. What do we call them? International syndicate. Within 2 years of Goulart's overthrow, thanks to these concessions, foreign companies gained control of 50% of Brazilian industry, often through expediency of what the Brazilian finance minister called constructive bankruptcy, a combination of fiscal and monetary measures that forced local firms to sell their foreign interests to go broke. By 1971, 14 of the country's 27 largest companies were in the hands of foreigners, and the remainder 8 were state owned, and only 5 were private. So now that should paint the picture of who's behind Operation Gladio. They, again, this is limited to like 7 lines. This is what the whole book is about. Operation Gladio. The CIA works for the international syndicate, as does Mossad, MI6, every intel, the Galen apparatus he set up in Germany, all of them. They work for this international syndicate. Their job is to go around and rape and pillage the resources of countries. And if any duly elected entity, to include Donald Trump, gets in their way, their job is to depose him, period. And these stay behind units were implemented to do that. Cattle prods on both sides, push you in the middle. Okay. When Condor was launched in 1969, Argentina, unlike Bolivia, Colombia, Peru, and Uruguay, posed no real problem. The majority of the country remained deeply conservative, devoutly Catholic. Juan Perón had returned from exile to defeat President Hector Cambora in the general election. This, for the church and the CIA, was a happy development. Cambora, during his short term, had restored diplomatic relationships with Cuba and had granted amnesty to all political prisoners, which meant they had to go, or he had to go. The country had fallen into chaos, chaos to them, So they bring in their own guy, Perone, um, and he ends up being president for a long time, and his wife ends up being his vice president. So let me read. Hold on. I want to look at this real quick before we get into that next one. Does this book describe the particular units? I learned from my training that there is different Gladio units. So it's kind of it's probably a good analogy to special ops. Um, Although, because all of these are connected by the Masonic lodge structure, I they are not separated from a strategic standpoint. What I found in doing, and I bought another book called NATO Secret Armies. Um, when you read the in-depth analysis of this, this is not your typical that the only Gladio units are technicians like you have in special ops. Like in special ops, in the deployed units, you may have a team of 10 to 15 people all specialized, and they may not know what another guy down the road is doing, or even that there's another team in the next country. That's not at all the way this operates. The way this operates is that these people that make up Gladio units are and they comprise everybody, the clergy, the people within the government, and the tacticians on the ground. And they all meet via lodge meetings. So they know who each other are. The the beauty of this is because of the secrecy of these secret societies like the Masonic Lodge that they meet in, um, renders them basically stealth. And that was the whole purpose of it from our first night. They were to be citizens by day and killers by night. So they all have regular day jobs. They work in our government, they work in our military, they work in intelligence. And at night, they can all be guerrilla warfare people. I hope that answers your question. So back to um, uh, Argentina. So Gelli, who now keep in mind, he's the Grand Master of the Lodge in Italy and infiltrated throughout the whole Italian mafia government and everywhere else. Okay, P2 was a guest of honor at the inauguration of Perón when he returned to Argentina. Following the ceremony, Perón knelt at the feet of the P2 worshipful master in public. Italy's Prime Minister, Andreotti Roddy, was also in attendance but did not receive this gesture of obedience from the Argentine president. The act was more than symbolic. Gelli had mustered substantial support for Perón's return from the CIA and funneled over $70 million in black funds to Peroni's Civic Front National Liberation, which was the organization that got him to power. The day before his return to Buenos Aires, Perón had knelt before Gelli in a secret ceremony becoming a member of the P2. The rite was performed within Peroni's villa in Madrid, Spain. Perón boarded Alitalia plane that had been chartered by Gelli and his triumphant return to his native land. In 1974, Perón issued a decree granting Gelli a highest Argentina award and appointed him the honorary ambassador to Italy. By this time, the P2 Lodge had been established in Argentina as well, because they are about ready to go crazy. So, 13 months after his return, Perón dies. He suffered a massive heart attack. He's succeeded by his wife, and immediately, supposedly, all of these Che Guevara and Marxist revolutionaries are all over the country all of a sudden. And they have a group of indigenous people, and this is what I really think it is. So they have indigenous people who oppose the Spanish colonization of their land, and they have launched attacks. They killed executives of GM, Ford, Chrysler, and began raiding military bases for weapons and explosives. That does not mean these people are communists. It doesn't mean they're left wing. That just means they don't like the fact that they were invaded by Nazis, they were invaded by Spain, and they want those people out of their country. So by 1975, the guerrillas had conducted ambushes on the police. There was battles with the army, and 10,000 Argentines were killed in the struggle. But along with the bloodshed came something from Argentina that was infinitely more sinister in the eyes of the Vatican, an ideology that threatened not only the fundamental purpose of the US imperialism, but also the very core of the Roman Catholic doctrine. You're going to laugh when you hear this. So, Latin American bishops in Medellin, Colombia, in 1968, um, from Pope Paul VI called upon the Vatican in their official proclamation to defend the rights of the oppressed and the poor, and not to support wealthy people and their agenda. The bishops condemned the Holy See's alignment with powerful elite and denounced the opposition of the Latin American people, not only by the strong armed dictators, but also by the US and other first world countries. So their most pressing issue was economic development, not political oppression. So this document declared that violence is sometimes necessary when directed against the government and social institutions. So New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, to the rescue, foresaw the dangers of this new theology. So he does a tour of Latin America on behalf of President Nixon, and he warns that U.S. business community, international syndicate, um, that there's anti-imperialistic nature to this document. You think? The Rockefeller Report became the basis of Nixon's Latin America policy and spoke for the need of emergence of military regimes that would put an end to this movement and warned the Nixon administration that they better keep an eye on the Catholic Church. So now you have the US foreign policy that's advocating military regime change and suppression of the Catholic Church if they don't toe the pro-Western policies. Ta-da. Okay, so priests formed what this guy calls left-wing organizations. They're not left-wing organizations in 7 countries. They opened, and supposedly because of this, they opened themselves up for coup attempts by the U.S. and other Western organizations. So anyway, Pope Paul VI was at his wits' end after trying to appease the leftists with a series of social justice pronouncements. He realized that the only way now that he can assert his papal authority is by force. So, of course, it couldn't be overt. So they needed to unleash the Catholic organizations, including Opus Dei, which we heard about last time, Catholic Action, which we heard about the time before that, working in tandem with the Nixon administration and the CIA. What? That's crazy. Operation Condor, a program intended to eradicate communist groups and movements, or nationalist groups, or people that just didn't want the invaders in their country throughout South America, got underway in early 1970s when Opus Dei elicited support from the Chilean bishops for the overthrow of a democratically elected government of President Salvador Allende. The Catholic group began to work closely with CIA-funded organizations such as Fatherland and Liberty. The gall of these people. Fatherland and Liberty are the names of the CIA organizations used to overthrow a duly elected president, which subsequently became the dreaded Chilean secret police. In 1971, the CIA began shelling out millions to the Chilean Institute for General Studies, an Opus Dei think tank, for planning the revolution, including lawyers, economists, executives, business leaders, media, all subsidized by the CIA. After the coup, the all of these people ended up as cabinet members and advisors to the military junta. Ch- Chile's new foreign minister immediately began seizing control of the presidency. General Augusta Pin- Pinochet rounded up thousands of alleged communists in the National Stadium for execution. And that's just anybody he doesn't like. The full fathom of Vatican involvement in Condor has never been sounded. Every phase of the operation, including the purging of left-wing clergy, received tactic approval from the Pope. Leaders of the military junta, including the general, were devout Catholics, including when Pinochet was taken into custody in England for the murder of thousands of Chileans in 1998. He was mystified by the charges. When he initiated his pogrom, Archbishop Trujillo, General Secretary of the Latin American Episcopal, basically condoned what he was doing. And so this guy is dumbfounded that he's arrested in the British government and is going to be held responsible for the murder of all of these people. When he finally went on trial in 2005, a Chilean judge asked him about his reign of terror, which had resulted in the murder of over 4,000 Chileans, the torture of over 50,000 people, and the disappearance of hundreds of thousands of people. The general piously answered, I suffer for these losses, but God does not, but God does the deeds. He will pardon me if I exceeded in some, which I don't think I did. So he thinks um, nothing's wrong with what he did. And if I'm not mistaken, I watched this guy interviewed the author. And if I'm not mistaken, Pinochet is the guy that loaded up dead bodies in airplanes, flew them out over the water, and dumped them out. So the bodies would never be found as part of Operation Gladio. In 1975, in Bolivia, the interior minister publicly acknowledged subsidiary of the CIA grew up a master plan to help Vatican officials for the elimination of liberation theology, dubbed the Banzer Plan. So you have the guy, Banzer was Bolivia's right-wing dictator who fancied himself the defender of Christian civilization. So basically, you have Banzer came to power in Bolivia as a result of a 3-day coup in 1971 that left 110 people dead and 600 wounded. This coup was recently declassified by the U.S. State Department documents, was funded by the CIA as part of Operation Condor or Operation Gladio. Take your pick. Banzer relied on Klaus Barbie, who recruited a mercenary army of neo-fascist terrorists, Operation Gladio, including Stefano Del Che. To fund the army, Banzer ordered cocoa trees to be planted throughout the country's failing cotton fields. And what is that? That's the source for heroin. So now we've got the, and look at the timing. This is 1975, between 74 and 80. And what was happening at that exact time? We were pulling out of Vietnam and we were losing our access to those opium fields. So what do? We just switch gears, go someplace close to home, create a couple more coups and turmoil like we did in Cambodia, in Laos, and Vietnam. Now we're in Bolivia doing exactly the same thing. And look what the new dictator does. He plants a bunch of opiums for his overlords, which happen to be CIA, MI6, whoever. So now we have the new setup with the Colombian cartels and laboratories, and we're going to begin the creation of a multi-billion-dollar industry of this Operation Gladio coup. So cocaine went in 1975 from $1,500 a gram. 10 years later, because of this operation, it went down to $200 per gram. The CIA became an active participant in this new drug. Well, I mean, they were in every drug cartel. So this particular operation, though, much closer to home, Gary Webb, the reporter for the San Jose Mercury News, when he broke this story, he ended up losing his job, said and documented the focus of this drug trade was going to be focused in LA and Compton, all black neighborhoods, but we're the racist. So even prior to the enactment of the Banzer Plan, the Vatican played a role in the emergence of the cocaine trade and the money laundering, because that's the part that the um, Vatican Bank has always been part of. Um, so the Vatican Bank charges them anywhere from 15 to 20%, what we found out last time, in money laundering. So it talks about the same setup. The Italian banks under Sedona's control launder the money through Switzerland, Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, and shell companies. This one is called Cisalpine Overseas Bank in Bahamas. So evidently they have regional shell banks and shell companies. Cisalpine was set up by Sedona and the Archbishop Marcinkus through the Bank of Ambrosiano Holdings, which was a Sedano bank, a Luxembourg company under the Holy See's control. By the time Operation Condor got underway, they were receiving regular deposits of millions of dollars from Latin American drug lords. And Archbishop Marcinus was to proclaim that the shell company presented the quote unquote perfect crime. They just are so proud of themselves. So let's see. That's enough of the Bolivia. We got what they're doing. They want to destroy liberation theology, get rid of any of the archbishops in the Catholic Church that has anything to do with it. Now we get to the dirty war in Argentina. But no Latin America, not even Pinochet's Chile, could equal the level of violence that followed the military coup in March 24th, 1976 in Argentina. Indeed, the only regime to create a state of fear approximating that of Argentina was Hitler's Germany. As many as 30,000 political prisoners, including students, union organizers, journalists, pregnant women, were killed and disappeared between 1976 and 1983. Dirty Wars, which was fully endorsed by the Ford, Carter, and Reagan administrations. Political killings took place on average of 7 a day in 1977. And that's during the Carter administration. You know, the peace-loving guy. Nor were Argentinians the only victims. An estimated 14,000 refugees from other South American military regimes were told to leave the country or face arrest. Torture was automatic for anyone arrested. Recently declassified national security documents show that the CIA and the State Department remained primary sponsors of the military junta, which was led by General Jorge Videla. February 16, 1976, 6 weeks before the coup, Robert Hill, the U.S. ambassador to Argentina, reported to the Secretary of State Henry Kissinger that the plans for the coup were underway and the public relations campaign had been mounted that would cast the new military regime in a positive light. The leaders of the junta remained determined to minimize any resulting problems with the U.S., because that's where they're getting all their money. March 1979, 2 days after the coup, William Rogers, an assistant secretary for Latin America, advised Kissinger that the military takeover of Argentina would result in a fair amount of repression, probably a good deal of blood. Kissinger's response, quote, "Yes, but that is in our interest," unquote. And the "our" is not Americans. So, March 1967, Ambassador Hill sent a 7-page assessment to the new regime to Kissinger. In the report, Hill wrote, "This is probably the best executed and most civilianized coup in Argentina's history." A week later, the U.S. Congress approved a request from the Ford administration now, written by Kissinger, to give them $50 million in new military aid. Hello, American Guerrilla. I love the name. With much aid in hand, the junta launched not only its own purge of left-wing dissidents, but also attack on the Jewish community. So all of a sudden, you get all of these pro-Hitler Goebbels, Jewish school, synagogue, newspaper businesses were being bombed. Prominent Jewish citizens were kidnapped, blackmailed, intimidated. In 1976, unidentified thugs drove through a Buenos Aires Jewish quarter and just basically opened fire, swastikas everywhere. So the Catholic complicity. This is where it gets very interesting. On the eve of the coup, General Videla and other plotters received the blessing of the Archbishop of Parana, Adolfo Tortolo. The church, he says, the church has its own specific mission. There are circumstances in which it cannot refrain from participating, even when it is a matter of problems related to the specific order of the state, unquote. He urged everybody to cooperate in a positive way with the new government. This is even after thousands had disappeared. He says, quote, "I have no knowledge, I have no reliable proof of human rights being violated in our country," unquote. He praised the military regime, saying that the armed forces was simply carrying out their duty. But that didn't work in Nuremberg. The viceroy of the army, Bishop Bromanen, characterized the campaign as a defense of morality, human dignity, and ultimately a struggle to defend God. "Therefore, I pray for divine protection over this dirty war," he even called it that, "in which we are engaged." He told a university audience, quote, "Atheistic materialism versus Christian humanism." That was what the struggle was. So, and he told everybody to ignore any foreign accusations about disappearances. That wasn't supposedly happening. So General Videla, who is currently serving a life sentence for his part in the dirty war, told reporters that he conferred with the cardinal, another cardinal, the leading Argentine cleric, about the regime's policy of eradicating left-wing activists, and that he advised him in a manner in which the junta should deal with all dissidents, including clerics who advocated liberation theology. The general's claim is supported by a second bishop in regards to the troublesome priests and nuns that might get in his way. His statement was made when questioned about the disappearance of 2 Jesuit priests, a Francisco Gelec and Orlando Yorio, and 6 members of their parish. The disappeared priests were under the charge of the guy that's currently Pope Francis. He was the provincial general of the Society of Jesus in Argentina. Those Supposedly, the accusation of these two particular Jesuit priests is they were espousing liberation theology among the slums of dwelling poor in Buenos Aires. That's their crime. So the two of them that were in Pope Francis's charge while he was the lead guy in Argentina were taken to the notorious Navy School of Mechanics in Buenos Aires. It was the most important of the military government's 340 detention and torture centers. 340 detention and torture centers, all supported by the Catholic Church. So I'm not going to go into the description of what they used for torture because it's gross. But they tortured people relentlessly at these locations, this being the worst. Um, this particular one also served as the disposal site for other naval camp corpse, which were initially buried in the sports fields. Oh, no, this is the one. I'm sorry. So it was the Argentina one, not the Bolivian one. There's so many. I mean, they all, just about every country in South America went under a regime change as a result of this. So it was Argentina that flew them out and dumped the dead bodies off the coast of Buenos Aires. And the pilot testified that the prisoners fell like ants from the planes during one of the trials. Declassified documents from the Secretary of State, Cyrus Vance, continued to support the military junta in Argentina despite knowing all of this was going on. So these two Jesuit priests were released after 5 months of captivity. They were found half naked in a field outside of Buenos Aires. Pope Francis later insisted that he secured their release, but no documentation has ever been presented that that is the case. Those two Jesuit priests say that absolutely did not happen and that it was Pope Francis that turned them in and gave their names to the Navy for preaching the wrong theology. In addition, he said that Pope Francis had expelled him from his teaching position at the Jesuit school and had spread false rumors to the Argentine high command that he was a communist to ensure, oh, and that he was chasing women to ensure his arrest. So he is quoted as saying from subsequent statements by an official, let's see, it's also refuted. Oh, yeah. So one of them said, from subsequent statements by an official and 30 documents that I've been able to access later, we were able to prove without any room for doubt that this man, Pope Francis, did not keep his promise to protect priests, but on the contrary, he presented false denunciation to the military. A journalist recently uncovered a military document from 1976 in the archives of the Argentinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs that appears to provide proof that Pope Francis provided damning testimony about the two priests in his charge to the junta. So he actually testified against them. And there's quotes. The Vatican at the time of this writing continues to affirm Pope Francis is innocent in the matter, insisting that there has never been any concrete or credible accusations against him. But it gets worse. Other criminal allegations that were directed at Pope Francis was from the Grandmothers of the Plaza Mayo, a human rights organization established to locate children stolen during the Dirty War. Does that sound familiar? Every one of these wars ends up with missing children. This is just one instance. The Jesuits' provincial general failed to assist a family of 5 who were awaiting execution by a death squad. This is just beyond the pall. One member of the family was a pregnant young woman. The 5 had appealed to the Superior General of the Jesuit of Jesus at the Vatican. The Superior General turned the matter over to Pope Francis in Argentina, who remained the provincial general of the order in Argentina. He in turn sat on the case for several months, only to then pass it off to a local Catholic bishop who would have no authority. The bishop reportedly returned to Pope Francis with a letter from the junta stating that 4 members of the family had already been killed. The young woman had been kept alive long enough to deliver her baby because they didn't want to be accused of abortion. Let that sink in. The baby was given to a prominent family and could not be returned to its maternal grandmother or any other blood relative. Pope Francis later claimed he had no knowledge of stolen babies, of which there were hundreds, if not thousands, until the collapse of the regime. He said that he did what he could to save people from the regime. We know that not to be the case. Who was? I don't think it's the beginning. I no, because everywhere these people have been, they create war, and a lot of the war obviously generates orphans, and that feeds this international syndicate because they sell them. And this is by far not the first operation. So Pope Francis was according to the author, was a very cowardly attitude when it comes to something so terrible as the theft of babies, whose husband, this is the um, one of the ladies who was involved in this family. He doesn't face this reality and it doesn't bother him. The question is how to save his name, save himself, but he can't keep these allegations from reaching the public. The people know how he is. So this is a member of the family of those 5. Um, so um, Pope Francis, when serving as the head of the Argentine Bishop Conference, refused to defrock one of the friars, even after he had been jailed for life in 2007 for 7 killings, 42 abductions, and 34 cases of torture, in which he told victims, God wants to know where your friends are. So this is a friar who's torturing people in Argentina, and Pope Francis refused, even after he was jailed for life, to take his church credentials away. So he knew he did that. I mean, even if you want to claim he didn't know anything else. In 2005, Argentine human rights attorney filed a criminal suit against Pope Francis, accusing him of being complicit in the kidnapping and torture of the 2 Jesuit priests. He refused to respond to the subpoena, invoking his immunity of being a Vatican official. It also goes on to say that Pope Francis regularly hid people on, supposedly, he claimed that he had hid people on the church property to try to protect them. But there's in several of the other things that I've read, that's a claim that there's not a lot of uh, support for. And it says, the lady says that his own words condemn him and prove that he condoned the torture and the killing, because the dictatorship could not have operated without his key support. And that's really true because Argentina at the time was a very Catholic nation. And had he come out and denounced the dictatorship, that would have caused all kinds of havoc. And he did not do that, despite knowing all of this. So then, of course, in 2013, he becomes the Pope Francis. All of the nagging questions of his background still there, and everybody, at least in Latin America and Argentina, knows exactly who he is, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. You end up, you have no legitimacy. So anyway, that brings us to the end of our chapter. We're on chapter 9, which is where we're going to pick up. It won't be tomorrow, so we're gonna schedule our next one for Thursday because I got a real exciting, invite by someone to meet, Steve Friend, the guy that is the, FBI whistleblower, tomorrow over in Clearwater, so my husband and I are gonna run over there and do that, and I'm really excited about that. Um, so let's check out the comments. You did it. Remember the SS Dr. Magdalene took twins? Yes, you're right. He did. Um, So, yeah, and of course, Argentine by the time, all of this was happening, it was like the second home to so many of the, Nazis that, ironically enough, had been exported via the Catholic Church underground railroad system, that we learned in some of the earlier chapters. The Catholic Church even dressed these people up in cleric robes, to whisk them through their underground railroad system through Spain, through Egypt, um, through Italy into Argentina. So, since our history has been manipulated to make the good guys bad guys, then is Putin evil? Was Saddam Hussein? So, I don't believe Putin's evil at all. And I think there's a lot of documentation. As a matter of fact, go read the speech that Trump gave in Poland. He specifically says that Putin is not a bad guy. That there is and what's interesting about that speech we talked about a couple of nights ago. Um, in that same speech, he talks about the network of terror, which I believe he's referring to Operation Gladio. Um, and I don't know if you follow me, Bridget, on True Social, but I made the comment today about the whole Saddam Hussein thing. So, what I found interesting is the timing in when in Italy, when the blow up of all of the news of Operation Gladio began, and they started having trials and holding people accountable, and there was all kinds of revelations coming out that implicated every sitting person in the Senate over there, the prime minister, the president, um, happened to be in 1990. And it happened on August 2nd. And so I was reading in this other book, um, that date, and I had read it in Operation Gladio, but for some reason it just didn't even dawn on me. But I read the date in this other book, August 2nd, and it like blew my mind because August 2nd was the first day, other than having gone to Mexico and, Vancouver, Canada, that my feet ever sat, um, on the ground in a foreign country. We landed in Rome, Italy, August 2nd to start a 3-year assignment in Southern Italy, and I got off the airplane on the international terminal side. You gotta go through the passport area. I come around the corner off the jetway, and there's this mass of carabinieri everywhere with AK. For every person in the airport, there's like 5 soldiers, and I'm like, "What the hell did I get myself into?" And I've got my little girl, my ex-husband's with me. I'm like, "Are you kidding me? What's going on here?" So we get up to the passport place, and I asked the person that was working if they spoke English. They did. And I'm like, what is this normal? And they're like, ha ha ha, no. Saddam Hussein just invaded Kuwait. So think about that for a second. You have Operation Gladio go mainstream, blow up huge on just before August 2nd, and all of a sudden you've got Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait, and now we're gonna go to war, and all of the crap about Europe, is gonna get swept underneath the rug. I'm sure it's all a coincidence, not. So, that's what this syndicate does. Uh, if if you're going to learn anything, they are going to create so much chaos that whatever gets revealed gets second place timing to whatever they want you to focus on. Just like the Um, $2 trillion missing out of the Pentagon on the day after or day before 9/11. So the day before. So whatever news that they don't want you to focus on, there's going to be a false flag. And all eyes are going to be on that. And that's exactly what happened when Operation Gladio went mainstream in Europe. Everything got blown up in 1990. It got revealed. So that was an epiphany to me. Um, and I wrote about it today on Truth Social because it just blew my mind. Um, and oh, the tie-in is who was president on August 2nd, 1990? George Bush Sr. What was his job? CIA director. What was his job before that? CIA agent right after World War II. So you've got the guy that was a CIA agent for basically his whole entire life. He was a CIA director in the formation of Gladio units. And he just so happens to be president when the shit's about ready to blow up. And all of a sudden, we're going to war with Iraq. Are you kidding me? So um, it's all a very similar pattern. And what was it that Theta said? You don't concentrate on the incident, you concentrate on the patterns. And that's exactly what this is. Pattern of deception, pattern of corruption, and it all goes back to Operation Gladio. So I will see you again Thursday night, 6:30. Thanks for joining us.